Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'll tell you what, so many of you listeners know that my one word for 2025 is bigger, and that's why we have gone out and found an incredible guest for today's session. This is someone who's really going to challenge you to think bigger, to live your life in a more intentional way, to grow your business in a more intentional way, to operate as an executive, really to just start achieving all the success that all of you really dream of. Why? Because as entrepreneurs, we've got big dreams. So this is someone who helps us actually achieve them. Let me tell you all about today's guest. His name is David Olcott. He's the founder, president, and CEO of Samurai Success, which is an international executive, organizational, and personal coaching firm headquartered in Denver, Colorado. David has poured the wisdom he has gained from 35 years of coaching into the trademark Samurai Success coaching system, which provides a proven roadmap for success. He's coached individuals and organizations all over the world, helping them navigate this physical plane, integrating Newtonian and metaphysical principles. That's interesting, isn't it? We're going to hear from him more about that, helping them remember who they are. David's clients become more purposeful and their businesses become more sustainable and profitable. David is truly in service of others and helps them create a successful life, meet their destiny, and leave a legacy of their own. Even that bio challenges us to think bigger about ourselves and the work that we're doing. So I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with David Olcott. Holy cow, David. I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I'm truly excited about our conversation today.
Heck yes, likewise. We've got a lot of stuff we got to get into, but first things first, you've got to take us beyond the bio. Who's David? How'd you start doing all these amazing things?
Interesting, we were just off screen, we were talking about growing up in the Florida Keys and the amazing amount of people that were all on vacation, if you will, coming down to my hometown and interacting with them gave me this really unique opportunity to talk to very successful and wealthy people at a very young age. And I was just so curious about how they had enough money to be able to come down there on vacation and take this time off. So I started this, what would be called an interview process, but actually just talking to them and getting to know them a little bit differently and what made them tick. And I was just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I love that overview. David, I've never said this here on the air, but when I was 18, I majored in economics and finance in college. And similar to you, I just started studying billionaires. And I asked myself, what are those common themes? And I started jotting them all down. And that became this guiding document in my life that I always look back on. And it's a collection of quotes, mindsets, attitudes, life lessons that they've shared with us. Why? Because success leaves clues. There's so many clues out there that give us insights. Talk to me about some of those early ones that you picked up and some of those patterns that you saw.
So one of the basic things that people told me about was never give people access to your money or your time if you don't know they've done it better than you. And that was kind of one of those big themes that you talked about is people that are very wealthy, very clear about who they are and what they want to do. And that was a driving force of, okay, so how do I find out who I am? And that was the discovery of in this lifetime, if you will, that we're not here to discover who we are. We're actually here to create who we are. And that spiritual journey that really is blended now into being in service of business owners is really a different way of being able to solve problems.
Ooh, David, I love the fact that this is where you're kicking things off in today's episode and conversation, because I feel like it goes counter to a lot of business advice and entrepreneurial advice. So frequently, even in society, just watch a movie and they'll talk about the character has to find themselves, create. That just seems so much more intentional to me. It also excites me because it's something that we can control, David. Talk to me about that different approach.
So here I was, looking, I had to go discover who I was. I needed to find myself. These were all these typical phrases that we use all the time. And I got caught up and hooked into those things. And it took me on a journey of listening to everybody else about what I should do. And I will tell you, I was living this amazing life in South Beach. We were selling real estate to all the stars. I was really living this life that I always imagined was going to be successful. I had access to an amazing amount of money. I was living in a multi-million-dollar mansion. Our office was a yacht selling real estate on Star Island to all the stars, meeting and rubbing elbows with Sylvester Stallone, Gloria Estefan. I mean, the world was there, and I was like touching it. I was in it, and I was absolutely depressed out of my mind. I was so unhappy, Brian, which says those two things aren't supposed together. They weren't supposed to be connected. And yet there I was. And so as I was listening to all these other people tell me who I should be and what I should do, I was like, there's got to be a different way. And so that put me on a journey of a more spiritual path of being able to say, let's go talk to some masters. Let's go talk to some people and learn from them what they've had to say over the centuries about how we're not here to discover who we are or have someone else tell you who you are. You're here to create that internally. And I will tell you, as I take a look at that map and that model, that structure, then you start looking at celebrities, people that we admire or don't admire. I will tell you, the majority of people that I've met personally or interviewed or read anything about them have followed this structure about creating who they are for their own success.
Yeah, David, we're definitely going to get into that structure. And I'm super excited to hear more about that and go deeper into it. But before we get there, I want to introduce this into the conversation because it sounds to me like our labels and our identity, it plays into the way that we show up in the world. Hearing you talk about these celebrities on Star Island, which for anyone who has driven past Star Island and seen those mansions, or heck, just go on Google Maps and look at the satellite view, even from space, you can see how impressive these mansions are. And David, it invites people to think bigger. But with that said, hearing you talk about these celebrities, I think back to when I was 19. I just started my soccer blog. It was my first business. I was interviewing some of the world's best soccer players on planet Earth. And what I realized in that moment is how small and insignificant I felt. And that wasn't the reality. None of us are small or insignificant, but it of course comes from our mindset is we can identify how it is that we are. And I felt a million miles away from these soccer stars that I was interviewing. I felt completely separate from them. Talk to us about the removal of that barrier. It just seems to me like when you were in these situations, and obviously the work that you continue to do with incredible people in all different industries, it seems to me like you don't have those barriers or those labels to hold you back.
Well, I absolutely did and used to have that. As a matter of fact, those labels and those belief systems and the values and questions you used to have, the way I focused on things, by using my physiology, my feelings, all these things seem to be in control of me. And that's when I realized there was got to be something bigger than what I was doing. And so the bigger was actually this self-creation and sitting down and actually writing out the characteristics that you had mentioned earlier, right? From those people I'd met in the Keys to the business people, to the celebrities, what were the characteristics that I admired in other people? And I knew I couldn't become these other people, or at least I realized that later on because I used to work for a guy named Tony Robbins, and I attempted to be Tony Robbins. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. I'm like 5'8", $190. And, those contrasting things were I wasn't looking to be him because I can't be him. I could only be me. Well, who is me? And that's the creation that each one of us have the opportunity. We have the right, the free will to be able to create that. And that's the important, bigger conversation we're having today, is so many of us have forgotten this immense power and technology to be able to create this identity, which then creates and manifests everything around you. It's the biggest belief system you have in your arsenal about creating and manifesting the things you truly want in this lifetime.
Yeah, David. Oh, I love hearing you talk about this. All right, listeners are probably saying, Brian, go there with him. So, David, I'm just going to go straight there with you because you talk about it being a power. And what I love about any power in life, whether it's in a job or in politics or in our personal lives, it's only a power if we take that power and if we use that power for good and for the things that we want. So, David, how do we begin taking advantage of this power that we all have to start creating ourselves?
Well, first thing is to acknowledge it. And then the second one is to realize that when you're creating things in this physical realm, this lifetime, this Newtonian science, if you will, there's also another realm beyond this that you and I have access to. And we're the only species on the planet that have access to a spiritual nature. And inside that place, we're starting to learn and have been told for centuries that we have access to a different technology. Now, that's an interesting word to use when you're talking about spiritualness and things like this, but I believe there's a mechanical part of the universe, and then there's this faith-based concept within us. And you and I have access to that. What's important about knowing those things is then to start creating who you wish to be by finding those characteristics you admire in other people and writing those things out. And then by writing those things out, the thing that creates and manifests things in the human experience is something called your subconscious brain. Inside that part of your brain is something we call programming. And programming is what is manifesting 95% of all the events, all the material things, all the things that you think are good or bad are actually being attracted to you from that subconscious programming. We have discovered a way to get access to that subconscious programming. You personally, through a process that we have, is writing out who you want to be in those characteristics and creating that identity statement and then programming that into your own brain so that you can manifest the things you desire and want in this lifetime.
Yeah, I love that, David. I feel like we've all seen this. Whether people are aware of your type of work or not, we're all aware of it because when you buy a red car, every time you drive down the road, you start to see red cars everywhere. And it's not because all of a sudden everybody else had the same idea as you. It's because now you're more apt to see that. You notice it. You're more aware of it. And so hearing you talk about even writing down the traits of here's the things that I admire in others that I'd like to manifest for myself, well, then you start putting it into practice. That's why I choose a word of the year. It sets that tone, and by the end of the year I start to realize, holy cow, it leaked into every facet of my life, not just business. I want you to talk about that because a lot of people think that business is entirely separate from life, and they don't really, and vice versa. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge, talking in front of a worldwide audience of entrepreneurs, that your life is also going to affect your business. It's a two-way street. So David, with all of those things in mind, how do you start to make sure that we're choosing the right things? We're not worrying about the things that a lot of people worry about. We hear a lot of worrying emails from our listeners around the world as they try to grow their own businesses. Is it about shedding ourselves of those negative thoughts or worries? Or is it more about layering on and really honing in on those positive thoughts and desires and what we want to create?
It's interesting because one of the concepts we talk about here at Samurai Success with my martial arts background is you're either can be a worrier or you can be a warrior. And the warrior approach isn't about fighting and beating people up. It's about taking a proactive approach to life, a responsible, conscious-oriented approach to life. And if things happen where you have to protect yourself, well, you can do so. But majority of the time, that really doesn't happen when you're prepared. When you're prepared as a warrior, you'll find that you actually start attracting things that have nothing to do with conflict. They actually have everything to do with actually helping you get where you want to go. So this interesting thing that we're all doing right now in January, we're all setting goals and resolutions, things like this. There's an actual structure when you start studying people, as we do, is there's a structure to how we actually manifest things. It's a formula for success. And you said it earlier, success leaves clues. Well, those clues aren't necessarily enough because just because you have a great idea about something doesn't mean it's going to manifest. The difference between having an idea or dream about something, a dream without structure, become nightmares. And that's what we want to be able to avoid as humans because nightmares worry us. So how do we start to understand we've set a goal and then all of a sudden our brain and our mind start working together? And imagine your mind is like a drone and it simply does this one thing. It seeks out whatever your brain is programmed to do. So this mind of yours is floating around outside of your body, inside your body, and it's looking for things, and it's connected to your reticular activator, your eyes. So whenever you said earlier, whenever I go out and buy a red car, all of a sudden I start seeing these red cars. You can do that with anything. And all of a sudden, your brain, your mind, and your reticular activator start looking for these things. What if you could program that brain to look for opportunities and solutions just like the red car? And the answer is, you can. And successful people do this on a consistent basis.
Yes, I love that. David, this is powerful stuff that you're sharing with us here today. And what I really respect about this is, again, it's things that we all know subconsciously that we're aware of because they naturally happen. Whether we take control of them or not, our reticulative activation system is there and it's always working. Is it working for us? That's the question. You're the catalyst here sharing it with us today. So hopefully this is the start of people taking that power into themselves and using it intentionally. I think that's the big thing. But I've got to go there with you because you talk about the structure of manifestation. I'll share this with you, David, is that for a lot of us, I feel like manifestation was introduced to us by The Secret. Obviously, that book went super mainstream. The resulting movie went super mainstream as well. But a lot of people, David, actually, I'll throw a little bit of shade before I kick it back to you. Too often I hear from entrepreneurs who they say, oh, I'm just putting this into the universe, that this is what I want. And I say, that's awesome. I do that all the time. But then I work my butt off to go get it. Talk to me about that missing gap, because a lot of people don't have that structure. I want you to paint that view of what a structure of manifestation looks like, especially tied with that action that I know you love.
I love your approach to this. And I will tell you that book, that movie, 30 million copies of that book, The Secret, were sold. And I will tell you, I'm very thankful for its ability to be able to bring this to a mainstream conversation, because we're having this conversation before people wouldn't even talk about it. This is too woo-woo and woke and all that other stuff. But there's a real structure going on here. The missing component in The Secret is the action necessary in this physical realm, because there is a co-creation that isn't spoke about in The Secret that is very clear. The masters have spoken about for centuries, that while you're here on this physical plane, you can think about things all day long. It doesn't manifest the thing. If you're thinking about the red car, the red Corvette, you can think about that all day long. It does not manifest the red Corvette. Its job is to manifest the opportunity for the red Corvette. And that drama pause that I'm doing there is really important, because what's the gap between that potentiality of the red Corvette being there and the opportunity, and then it actually manifesting in your life? And that's called the work. That's the work we have to put in there. There's the action plan that must take place as a human being. And this all falls in alignment with this spiritual concept of why we're actually here. So Brian, you get all this stuff, right? We get all the cars, we get all of this money and houses and the women and the guys and whatever it is for you this lifetime that you consider successful. Here's the weird part about it. When you transition off this physical plane, you don't get to take any of that with you. What do you take with you? What you take with you is your experiences. Your experiences of the red car, your experiences of your mate, your experiences of not having a mate, whatever you have chosen to be successful, you take that with you. So in my understanding, the real purpose of this physical plane and our interaction as human beings is the experience of things, not the material stuff. So we're actually focused on the stuff that really doesn't serve us. So we got to change that. And once we understand that the universe's job is to create an opportunity based upon what you say, then you have the formula that there's an action that I have to take in order to make that manifest for my own personal experience.
Yeah, I love that. The way that you articulate it as well, David, is super powerful. I will say part of my role as a podcast host is I love putting my listener hat on and thinking, what are the listeners thinking that they would ask or want to ask David right here, right now? Because unfortunately, they can't participate in this conversation. I wish someone would invent that method of communication. But in the interim, I just think with my contrarian hat on is probably listeners who maybe are earlier on in their entrepreneurial journey, or maybe have hit a rut in their business or their life, and they're thinking, David, this all sounds great. I extrapolate the things you just shared with us, and I think about legacy. That's something that the older I get, I'm in my mid-30s now, I start taking very seriously. And I realize this stuff is about far more than just me and what I'm living for and what I'm doing on a daily basis. But you and I have the luxury of talking about those things, David. What's your response to the entrepreneur who's sitting there listening to this episode and saying, well, David, I'm just trying to survive right now. Like, you're talking about these big, meaningful, purposeful lives that we're meant to live and the legacies we leave behind, but I need to pay rent next month. I know that you deal with this and you get people out of that rut and that mindset. How do you navigate that conversation with them?
So I think there's a great opportunity here for a great adage, and that adage is practice makes I usually leave a big blank spot there because mostly people fill in the practice makes perfect. From my experience, practice makes permanent. And once you understand that concept, this thing that you mentioned earlier is bigger, right? Thinking bigger. In order to be able to get out of this rut, you actually have to project yourself into that potential future, even though you're experiencing what you're experiencing right now. You've got to have your brain and your mind compelled to a new place. So if you're just going to focus on now, you're just practicing, and that practice is making things permanent. But if you're doing the work now just to be able to pay the rent, that's good. That's what you need to be doing. But you need to spend time working on your life, not just in your life. And that's what we really help our clients do at Samurai Success from a business and personal standpoint. Because when you have both those things going on, all of a sudden you start manifesting opportunities that lead to that bigger picture that you've been talking about. And if you just stay in paying the rent, then all the universe is going to do is provide opportunities for you to continue to pay the rent. So now you have a choice. Which way do you want to play this lifetime?
Yeah, boom. David, I could listen to you talk about this stuff all day long. Time's flying by, but I want to squeeze a few more questions and topics in because this is something I've been thinking about a lot this year, especially all the conversations that I have with our listeners and so many other entrepreneurs. You're the very first person I'm sharing this with, and it just so happens to be on the air together. And that is, when I think about people starting their business, for example, I think about, for me, the healthiest times in my life where I've persisted and where I've dug in is when I can shed myself of expectations, because expectations set us up for disappointment. The only reason why people stop going to the gym is because when they look in the mirror, they look the exact same and they have this unreasonable expectation of instant results. So I always argue that we need to rid ourselves of expectations, but at the same time, and this is the caveat, and this is what makes it so difficult, you also genuinely, deeply to your core have to believe that the results will come. And so obviously now we're getting into faith, believing something before we can actually see it. David, you do far deeper work than I do in this realm. How do you balance expectations, a lack of expectations, or do you think we should have expectations, but also with that deep belief that we must carry in order to make it so?
What a great balancing act that we have to do as people, right? That's why it's oftentimes considered one of the most difficult jobs on this planet, which is being human. And I agree with that. So the opportunity is finding that balance of those two things. That balance doesn't get created until you know who you are. That identity, that belief about you is the starting point for all manifestation. As we're all setting goals right now, the missing component by you reaching those goals is, do those goals actually align with who you are? Once that happens, and by the way, if you have a clear understanding of who you are, you've written down those characteristics, and you started reprogramming yourself to live that life, the important part about it is that your state of beingness has to align with your action plan or doingness. And so when beingness and doingness start to align, you create something called congruence. Congruence is what leads to coherence. Coherence is a frequency that actually attracts things that you desire into your world. But all these things take time, and you've got to be patient with yourself. So expectation, attachment to outcomes, jealousy, all these things actually keep us away from those things because we're distracted by them. The key here is this: I've got to be able to write out a plan, and I've got to stick to that plan. And when I make adjustments to that plan, because things change in the marketplace, people affect me, those kind of things, I need to stick to that plan as best I can. Because if I know where I am and where I want to go, then the action plan is what's going to get me closer. Along the way, the answers you're really looking for are in the experience of walking through that plan. Once you get to that plan and that experience, you then have a readjustment, because the universe is co-creating with you. It's collaborating with you. It's conspiring at your benefit to help you see that. But oftentimes, to see the answer you're looking for today, you have to go through the process, faith, and get to the edge of that answer to see the next great question for the next great answer. And that's what it takes to be able to really be successful in this lifetime.
Yes, David, the way you share these things obviously is deeply brilliant, and we so respect and admire your work, which is why we've been so excited to have you here on this show. Hearing you say things like the universe is conspiring in our favor, that is such a powerful sentiment that the more that we look for that, the more we see it. It's why I love that quote of, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. The eternal optimist seems to always have reasons to be optimistic, whereas the eternal pessimist seems to always have an ability to find things to be pessimistic about. So it's powerful stuff, David. I want to ask you this question. Listeners know that we've got no pre-planned questions here, so that this is totally just us riffing, but I would imagine in the depth of the work that you do, David, part of your job, so to speak, is asking really deep and meaningful and insightful questions, and doing it in a way that doesn't just pull out the easy answers from your clients, but really forces them to think. You talk about finding ourselves. That's so at the root of all the things we've talked about here today. Can you give us an example of a question or two that really you leverage to start people to introspect and look really deep into the essence of who they are, why the heck they're here, and what legacy they want to leave on this planet?
Wow. Okay. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's imagine then you and I, Brian, we're just having a conversation and you're really dealing with some really tough challenges, some real significant problems. And what you're finding is that you're just not coming up with a solution. Okay. That means that the current source you're using to be able to solve that problem is not enough to get to the solution, because it's bigger than the source than you're calling upon. What if you and I as human beings had access to a different source? Let's stop there for a minute and just think about, okay, what are these sources you're talking about? Well, if you haven't noticed that our ego is a big source of information for us and solutions and how we're manifesting things, all you have to do is look around and see the chaos that's happening from that. But you and I have access to a different source called our soul. Now, whatever meaning you want to give that, that's fine. But in that space, there is something called pure potentiality. You and I have a belief system, or we've been taught, we've been programmed to believe that we need to figure out how to do things. Solutions, problems, solutions, right? We have to figure out how to do that. Well, I learned along my path that I have access to something else. If I learn who I am and I can get the hell out of my own way, I now have access to a different source of solution. That is source of absolute soul. And I can download that information through me as long as I get out of the way, and I have access to pure solutions that other people haven't thought of. What if you could find that process? What if you had that internal master inside of you? And you do, by the way. You could stop listening to me. You could stop listening to us. And you could start following yourself, this master inside of you, and living a true life of fulfillment.
Boom. Listeners, do you see why we've been so excited to have David here on the air today? It's because this is that deep and meaningful work. Probably, David, I would actually argue for most of us in our lives, we've never sat down and given this much intentional thought, because our school system doesn't do that. Traditional parenting techniques don't invite us. You called it out earlier in our conversation here today that historically it's been labeled woo-woo, but these are the truths that people who have made it, whatever mountain it is that we want to climb, these are things that people have picked up along those journeys. I can only imagine people who have climbed Mount Everest probably find answers, David, that you and I haven't found in our own lives because of the battle, because of the fact that they are warriors in that time. So I really love that. Gosh, I need to ask you about this. It's what initially caught our team's eye when we landed on your website, samuraisuccess.com. We're going to talk about it in just a few minutes, but the headline on your website, how big are your dreams? It says it right there, David. It shows how important that topic and that line of thinking is to you. I want to ask you about big dreams, because I've always loved Seth Godin's concept of it being far more dangerous to think small than it is to think big. It's way safer to think big, kind of like that old quote we all heard in like middle school and high school, which says, if you aim for the moon and you miss, at least you'll hit the stars. Talk to us about those big dreams. How big is too big? You know, we've all heard about SMART goals, where the R is realistic, which is a term I struggle with, David. Talk to us about the bigness of our dreams.
Well, having those big dreams is what gives this human aspect of us, this compelling future. If you want to see that, go, if you've got kids and they're just not cleaning their room and you really want them to clean their room. And then you say, listen, when you clean your room, we're going to go to Disney World. Now, Disney World, for that child, if it really is connection, let me tell you, you walk into that room for the next week, that room will be spotless and just the perfect example of cleanliness. Because they're not focused on the task of cleaning the room. They're focused on the reward and benefit of going to Disney World. Understanding that human psychology, we're just big kids. We've got to have this big, compelling future. The challenge with that is that, if your parents promised you were going to go to Disney World, the likelihood of you going to Disney World was pretty strong unless you had some parents that weren't always telling you the truth. And that's possible. But here's the deal. But we're on our own with this. We have to create Disney World for ourselves. We have to be able to do this work. I'm here to share with you, you're not alone in this. You are co-creating these things in this physical plane. And that faith is so important in this discussion. By the way, even if you don't believe in God or the universe or any of this woo-woo stuff I could be talking about, it doesn't mean it isn't conspiring to help you. So if you think you've got this on your own, that's fine, go for it. But there is a process and a structure and a formula for developing that success. Most of us don't set big dreams because we become expectations around those, we have attachments to the outcomes, and we get disappointed because we never seem to be getting to Disney World. Here's the structure. As you start an action plan to be able to get closer and closer to Disney World, you keep cleaning your room. Then cleaning your room turns into, I need to put a budget together. I need to find some time to be able to do some things. And it becomes a very different action plan than cleaning the room in our metaphor. And all of a sudden, as you do those things, the next logical thing to do will come to you, like out of nowhere. And you'll write, that's the next thing I got to do. And that's the next thing I have to do. And you'll be closer and closer to reaching your dream. Because at the end of the day, really it's about this faith, is this leap of faith they talk about from this place where you're located here to the place where you want to go. At Samurai Success, we help you focus on just closing the gap where the risk that it takes from jumping from here to here just gets smaller. If it's way out here, too big, too much faith. But if I reduce and risk mitigation, then all of a sudden the leap of faith that you have to take as an individual is a lot smaller. That's the process.
Yeah, I love that, David. Honestly, I think about when I was a kid going to the local pond and seeing frogs. Frogs don't have to jump over an entire pond. They jump from lily pad to lily pad, and that's more than enough to get them to the entirety of where it is that they want to go. So I could listen to you talk about this stuff all day long, David, because the more you say, the more inside I'll tell you what my inner mind is telling me right now is I'm just like, I know this to be true. I know that there's so much merit to what David is sharing with people, and it's up to each of us individually to choose to use this power. And I think that that's such a recurring theme. So listeners, the good news is David is someone who shows up in service of so many other people in so many ways. We're going to talk about his link in just a minute here after I ask the question that I love asking to wrap these episodes. But David has so many different podcast appearances, public talks. He has a book called Swords of Illumination. So we're going to talk about all of those things that you can continue gleaning insights and wisdom from David in just a few minutes. But before we get there, David, I always love asking this at the end of episodes, and that is a super broad question. You could take it in any direction you want, and that is, what's your one best piece of advice? Knowing that we're being listened to by wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their entrepreneurial journeys, you are one of us as well. You're not just a subject matter expert when it comes to these things we've talked about. You're a fellow entrepreneur growing and running your business as well. So what's that one thing that you want to leave listeners with today?
So as we talked about earlier, it's so important. And I tell you, I learned this about 27 years old, and it really shifted everything for me. And that is that you're not here to discover who you are or listen to other people about who you are. This is a opportunity for self-discovery and self-creation. And I literally mean that. That is the one thing that I understand about you in this physical plane. You actually get to create, because everything else has already been created. So that world of pure potentiality I was talking about, imagine a place in the universe where if you could get access to that every solution to every problem you could ever imagine has already been created. I know that's a lot, but just imagine it with me. How could I get access to that? Getting access to that realm of pure potentiality where all solutions already exist, the very first step in that is getting to know who you are and finding a way to be able to get the hell out of your own way so you can download that information. And this isn't woo-woo. I want you to take your favorite artist, musician, and I want you to do some research on them. And I promise you, like I did with John Denver, who was a very famous person in the 1970s and 80s when I was growing up, he said in an interview that blew me away, and it haunts me even today. As a matter of fact, living in Denver, Colorado, I'm sure John Denver had a big impact on that. And my love of flying also, because he was a famous flyer. And the key to that is that in an interview, he said, "How did you write Country Roads?" And he sat for just a second, and then it just came out of him. He says, "I was just sitting there thinking about songs to write, and all of a sudden it just came through me." And if you start listening to your favorite musician, you'll start hearing this theme over and over again, Ryan, that these massive artists have always downloaded this information. It just came to them. Whatever verbiage they're using, I believe that is access to the realm of pure potentiality. All that music, all that possibility already exists, and these artists have found a way to download that information into reality and then did the work to actually manifest it in this physical realm. That all starts with understanding you are not here to discover who you are here to create who you are.
Yes. And David, that is precisely why I'm going to say this. If normally at this point in the episode, I talk about the episode ending, but I know that you're leaving us with a lot of food for thought. And this is probably just the beginning of this episode for most people, because you've challenged us in new ways. And that's a perfect segue for people to go deeper into all the incredible work that you and your entire team do with Samurai Success. So David, you owe us some links. Where the heck can listeners go to find your book, to find all the great content that you're putting into the world? And of course, if they want to go deeper into exploring what it's like to work with you, your coaches, your entire team, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
So the best way to reach us is at samuraisuccess.com. And there's a huge library. As a matter of fact, we just started in social media. There's a huge library of videos there for you, accessible. A lot of these smaller clips are available to you. So that's probably the best place to go to get some resources if you're really interested in this material.
Yes, because listeners, as I already teased, David shows up for all of us, for himself, for his business. David shows up in service of others. So take advantage of all of David's brilliance. You want to digest this stuff because it's only going to expand the way that you think and the possibilities that you see for yourself. So you can hit that link, samuraisuccess.com, but you already know the drill. We're dropping it in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So scroll right on down. You'll find that link. You can click right through. Otherwise, David, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Truly appreciate our time together.